Hi, this is Dr. Larry Tranel with Dairy Economics 101. So this is session 2 on dealing with milking systems and how we think of these economically for us to work with. So I'm going to be talking about different products. I don't mean to endorse any product that we are going to be working with, especially with our robots. So we realize that when family systems that work with milking, we realize that family and culture and just personal preference, just like when you buy a vehicle, personal preference really play into these decisions as we go through that. So let's just kind of keep that in mind, but culture can be a big part of it as well. So the first thing I want young people to understand is the value of their labor. So I like to use this screen here because there's three types of people I tend to think in the way of young people wanting to try to get into the dairy industry. The first one I tend to say is that, there's a lot of people out there that just want to buy this new truck at a pretty young age. And so we can spend a lot of our money when we get to be retirement age, we might not have much left because we tended to spend most of our money. Okay, so we're going to take a look at that as one person. The second person decides to invest $2,000 a year from age 22 to age 30 while they're still relatively young. So in total, they invested $16,000. And at the end of that, they have about $183,000 when they reach 65. Compare that to the third person who invested $2,000 a year, but they didn't start doing it until their age 35. So they invested from age 35 till about age 65. And so they have a total of $60,000 invested, more or less. Okay, so by the time that they retire at age 65, they actually have less money than the person who basically only invested $16,000 but did it when they're young. So the key point to this whole thing is that we can spend our money or we can invest it wisely, but even more importantly is the value of our labor at a young age, because a lot of times we don't have much in the way of assets or anything like that. And so it's really our labor that we can turn to cash. Okay, so we can waste it as a young person, or we can be very useful, resourceful, and try to earn some money so we can then invest it. Okay, so the money, sometimes they'll say the money you make as a young person is often the biggest money you'll ever make. And I think this slide will actually kind of bear that out. So the bottom line with the value of our labor is that we can't afford to do things that are only half as efficient as somebody else when we're young, because the value of our labor, even though we get paid probably the least, per hour throughout our career when we're young, it's actually some of the biggest money we're still going to be able to make. So when we take a look at milking systems, this is a slide that comes from Wisconsin that they did a research project back in the 1990s at some time frame in there. And they looked at, as people modernized their dairy facilities, what happened to the milking system throughput. So the blue is actually before the modernization. So if we think back, a lot of stall barns back then. So people were milking 10, 15, 20, 30 cows per person per hour, okay, with an average of about 22. So we come into the modernization phase when they modernize, and then we start realizing that, we could milk 40, 45 cows per person per hour. Okay, so when we take a look at that, I still don't look at that as being very efficient. I think the sad thing is where I have this red bar here, is that even after modernization, how few farms still were milking in that 60, 65, 66 cows per person per hour. So I think that's kind of a standard of labor efficiency for our stall barns that we need to take a look at. So I think that milking system throughput has a big part of the economics of a dairy farm and how efficient that truly is. So how do you magnify the value of your labor? Again, realize that labor is an investment. It's what you have to sell as a young person. So why invest extra time every day when it's needless? So the example that we share with you below here is milking efficiency at 75 pounds per cow per day on 2x milking. So we can milk 22 cows per person per hour, 44 or 66 as 3 examples. Okay, so that comes with how many pounds of milk per hour we actually harvest as a labor unit. And then we look at the dollars per day. And so I think the important thing is when we take a look at labor, even if it's only $15 an hour, at 66 cows per person per hour, we can milk or just have our dollar cost per cow per day at 45 cents. And I think a goal is less than 50 cents. And the dollars per hundredweight at 61 cents, which I think a good goal for that is 61 cents as well, or 61 cents. So when we take a look at a robot, one of the things to think about with the robots is that, we can milk a lot of cows, with just one person. And I've seen some operations where one person's milking, we're working 120 cows, buying a lot of their feed in, and basically they're just running the dairy unit. And so that person might be selling out 3.2, 3.3 million pounds of milk per person per year, or 9,000 pounds a day. Okay, that's what I would call labor efficiency, but realize we might not all get that. So the labor on that robot might be a third of what even a pretty high efficient parlor might be at 61 cents. This one's only at 28 cents. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can analyze how we work with labor, but the important part is that that labor is worth something, and we need to understand that. So labor is undoubtedly the #1 reason why producers go robotic. So when we take a look at the maroon type lines, okay, these are before the robot or the automatic milking system went in, and the green is afterwards. So we did a survey back in 2012 and also back in 2017, and you can see what the decrease was for those herds as we take a look at how much labor they actually saved by putting in the robots. Okay, but there was a lot of variability on that labor saved as well. So one of the things I'd like to teach everybody is to take a look as we make investments on our farm. And I don't care what we're trying to invest in, and sometimes it can even be personal type things, but this whole concept of the fixed 5 cost tool. If I look back in college, I think this is probably one of the biggest things that I learned was this Dirty 5 fixed cost tool. So it stands for the dirty part: depreciation, interest, repairs, taxes, and insurance. And then plus we have some variable costs with that as well. So if I'm buying a car versus a truck, or just this car versus that car, or I'm buying this tractor versus that tractor, I'm buying a milking parlor versus a robot, I would employ this exact same tool to work with. So let's take a look at a few examples. So first of all, we're going to take a look at a truck versus a car. So this is my plain old car here on the right side of Buick LeSabre. Okay, so I spent $2,200 on the right side over here, and after I use this for 5 years, it's still got to be worth about $1,000. So my depreciation over those 5 years is about $240 a year. Compare that to this $40,000 truck, who's going to be worth about $20,000 after 5 years. So that 20,000 divided by 5, I've got $4,000 in depreciation over on this side. So the interest, $40,000 at 5.5%, $2,200 a year, versus my $2,200 at 5.5%, $121 a year. So the repair is about $1,000 versus $1,000. Okay, we might have more repairs on the older vehicle. I suspect they're going to be more expensive here, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on this truck. The taxes that we pay as we purchase this thing are basically right there, and then the insurance that we use on an annual basis to insure these vehicles as well. So the fixed sum here at $8,640 divided by about 20,000 miles a year tells me that this truck, just on a fixed cost themselves, is going to be worth about 43 cents a mile as a cost. While on this cheaper car that I tend to drive, it's $1,885 a year divided by those same 20,000 miles. So this one costs about 9 cents a mile on fixed cost. Now we're putting into gasoline, so this truck gets 15 miles to the gallon. If gas is at $3, I realize it's not quite that right now. This one gets about 25, so I spend about 12 cents a mile on gasoline, which gives me a cost of about 54 or 21 cents a mile in total. Where we take a look at this one here, it's costing us about 63 cents per mile. So when we look at just the cost of simple things like a truck, this Dirty 5 fixed cost tool can actually be a nice little tool to help us try to figure that out. And so we can kind of figure that out on variables, how much it costs us per hour to drive one truck versus another. And sometimes people are amazed that it costs them so much money per hour to actually drive that truck. But a $26 per hour difference in driving it. So we have that tool in our minds now. So what's the best way to milk me? Okay, so when we take a look at different types of milking systems. So here we have stall barns on the left side, followed by low-cost parlors, followed by high-cost parlors, followed by robots. And this one's actually on the right side. You might not be able to see the title. Is a 888 that's running 22 hours a day. So in the same respect here, we have our Dirty 5 tool: depreciation, interest, repairs, taxes, and insurance. We also have some different types of investments that we have with us, and our labor costs that go into it. There might be more on the variable cost. We can actually figure out based on that that the stall barn might cost us $2.17 in this example to milk a cow per hundredweight to milk a cow. The low-cost parlor less than $1 at 93 cents a hundredweight. The high-cost parlor at $1.98, so even less than the stall barn. The robot at $2.33. And so sometimes it's the people that are in stall barns, they can't believe how expensive it is to milk in a robot. And I just look at them and say, well, then you're actually probably one of the highest cost ways to milk cows in a stall barn as well. And so the preference I would tend to say is, how do you try to milk your cows? If you're going to milk them in a parlor, try to milk them for less than $1 a hundredweight. If you start spending $2 and $3 a hundredweight to milk your cows, you might as well have a robot do it, in my mind. But here on the right side, this double A actually has their cost down to 81 cents a hundredweight. So when you take a look at the percent of milk price, so the stall barn spending 12% of their milk check milking cows. The low-cost parlor about 5%, the high-cost parlor at 11%, the robot around 13%, not much different than the stall barn. And this double A parlor that's running 22 hours a day is all the way down to 5%. So a lot of times people would think, well, this one that's working here at 5% would surely never put robots in, but they're actually working with robots or milking with robots at this point in time. So that's kind of the synopsis that I just went through, but the bottom line is, what percent of your milk check do you want to spend milking cows, and what cost per hundredweight do you want to spend milking cows? If you're organic and you're getting a $30 milk price, to spend $2 or $3 or 10% of your milk check to milk cows probably isn't a bad thing. But if you're not organic, and say when milk prices get down to $15 or $16, you really want to be spending $3 a hundredweight to milk your cows, and I would think not. So the first robotic milker, 1981 in Holland, that's what it looked like. Okay, so a lot of big contraption with a lot of moving parts. Okay, compared to the robotic milkers today, and this is actually a rotary, the Dairy Pro Q rotary that milks about 400 cows per person per hour. Here's the one from DeLaValve that works with the EMR. And so there's different ways we can actually milk the robotics, so we can actually have them on rotary parlors as well. So we're going to compare an example of a retrofit two-robot system to a retrofit swing parlor, which I would call like maybe our Trans-Iowa low-cost parlor. So when we take a look at, first of all, the depreciation on these different types of parlors, I think one of the important part is we have this $400,000 robot. It's going to be worth about $70,000 at the end, and this is actually for two of them. So we have $330,000 that we're going to divide by 15 years, which gives us a cost and depreciation of $22,000 a year on these two robots. Versus this $50,000 swing over parlor, it's still going to be worth $5,000 maybe 20 years later, but after that 20 years, each year we're going to have a depreciation of about $2,250. Okay, so a big difference between these two. So the interest on $400,000 at 5.5% at $22,000 versus here at $2,250. The repair is $16,000 a year versus $1,000 a year, and the insurance that we're going to be spending is quite a bit different on these as well. So in sum, we have about $62,000 worth of cost on these two divided by the number of hundredweights we expect out of this on an annual basis. And so we're looking at robots at $1.88 per hundredweight, and we're looking at this retrofit swing possibly down to about 20 cents a hundredweight just for the fixed cost part of the tool. So now we have to add into our labor, and with the robot, looking at the labor of 1.5 hours for the two robots per day, times 365 days, so another 25 cents added into that. So it's not too far-fetched, kind of pretty similar to what Dave Kummel's slide was earlier on, about $2.13 per hundredweight to milk cows through a robot. Okay, and there's a big difference between a robot that is harvesting 3,000 pounds of milk versus one that's harvesting 6,000 pounds of milk in what its efficiency is. So on the right side here, we've got our low-cost parlor for, again, the goal is around $1 per hundredweight, and we're pretty close to being that. Our goal is at least 44, and I say almost at least 66 as well. We've got some that are milking 75 and 80 cows per person per hour as well. So the robot definitely has a big range, but so does the swing parlor, the low-cost parlor, but there's the range is definitely quite a bit lower than the robot. So how do we evaluate robots financially? I would tend to say it really depends if you're looking at profitability versus cash flow ability. And so I could say that from the system that you compare it to what you're milking with right now, there might be a $50,000 swing one way or a $50,000 swing another way. It really depends on the variables at play, and I'll try to go through some of those variables as well. So we already kind of went through some of these numbers. Again, this is the one from David Kummel, and you can see where the robot comes in pretty similar to what I just had showed as the example, or low cost, probably even less than what I showed. But the bottom line is that what does it cost to actually milk your cows? And so that's what we need to figure out. So here is a low-cost parlor. So this person, this is a Swing 15. One person milks in here by himself. I never appreciated being a Packer fan that he actually wore a Viking shirt while I was trying to videotape this. But these cows are coming in. The back gate is not even shut. He will prep 5, and then he will attach 5. And then he'll come back over here. He'll prep 5 more. He'll hit the buzzer for the back gate, and then actually bring more of the cows back in there. You can see it was hitting the back gate right there. Okay, so he'll prep these 5, and then he'll attach the next 5 or whatever. And then towards the end, he'll actually go down and actually dip some of those cows as well. So the bottom line is that this person doesn't get out of the pit. So in most parlors that are milking in Iowa or around the country, okay, we tend to train cows not to come into our parlors because we always want to get out of the pit to go get the cow. So here, these last few cows are not even loaded. And when they get loaded, then he will, sometimes he doesn't even shut the gate. But bottom line is that these longer parlors actually work better because I'm giving more time to for these cows to come in. So I tend to say that there's a lot of parlors out there that we try to make them work to our speed, and we need to actually let the parlor work towards the cow's speed. So when you start trying to push cows and hurry cows up, they get that adrenaline going, and sometimes they don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that it's a very friendly way to do it. So one person can milk about 75 cows per person per hour in this parlor that's being shown in the video. Here's one that was out in Colorado. It had 14 cows, kind of a quad 14. And so when you take a look at that, on average, a person was milking close to 80 to 90 cows per person per hour in this facility. So there's a lot of different ways we can milk cows, and there's a lot of different efficiencies that people attain. So when you start taking a look at 80 and 90 cows per person per hour versus that person that's still only milking 22 cows per hour, maybe in a stall barn, okay, that's a big efficiency. And as a young person, I'd still question, can you really afford that? Okay, when other people are doing it that much more efficient, and I realize that there's cost of doing business, but these low-cost parlors, I think, afford us a big way to try to work with them. So here they're just trying to reload the parlor in that Swing 14. So rotary parlors are a big hot topic in the western part of the USA. I tend to travel out there once in a while too, working with some dairy producers. When we take a look at some of these rotaries, that might be $400,000 to buy the parlor itself with 30 bale rotary, another $200,000 for the facility. And when I do travel, I tend to like to get my hands dirty a little bit as well and try to milk the cows as well. So these are just cows coming off that exact same parlor. So if you haven't seen a rotary parlor work, the cows on the left side will actually enter as that cow just left, and then they'll get sprayed with a little bit of water, and this cow that's coming off on the right here will start working down and actually being moved off the platform. So it's a pretty simple design. One, sometimes 2 people are actually attaching units or working with the attachment, and it's either an automatic dipper or sometimes there's a person walking around here to kind of help manage some of the cow flow as well, or for some units that might fall off or be squawking or whatever. So those are rotary parlors. Okay, here's another rotary parlor. One of the biggest things, whether it be in robots or rotary parlors, is just watch this cow being dipped. So if you take a look at these tits right here, or teats right here, that they will not actually get dipped. Okay, so there's a lot of things with these laser eyes that we need to work with. This is an 80 stall rotary parlor. So one of the biggest unsold pieces of your milking equipment, I think, is this chop gate. So this is on the Scott Wiedemeyer farm in Iowa. And so when we milk 75 to 80 cows per person per hour versus rapid exit, so I would rather actually see this chop gate versus the rapid exit if it's all designed correctly, but it's kind of a personal preference with that as well. So there's a lot of different things we can work with in these low-cost parlors, but I think this chop gate is one of the important parts. So here's a low-cost parlor that was actually built pretty cheap. So bottom line is a 2% slope on the floor going down towards the front of the feet of the cow. There's also a 2% slope going to the back of the parlor, so it's a dual slope, so the cows will actually open up their back legs for you and work with it. And when we take a look at these measurements, this is just a 4x10 sheet of galvanized steel wrapped through here. All the steel is actually painted. You can use galvanized, you can use painted, you can use stainless. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but I think those dimensions are pretty tried and true, and it's a very simple design for people to actually build their own parlor to work with. And so this is actually built in a 30 cow stall barn. And he's got a Swing 8 parlor working with it now too. So this is actually a quote from him that my back is straight. I don't do any bending. I've got great cow visibility. Cows can't kick me. There's no manure in the pit. Can milk about 65 cows per person per hour. The cheap crowd bringing the cows in. He says this is well worth it. The kids love it, and I do a better job milking as I can see the udders so well. So this is a double 12 parallel that's working over 85 cows per person per hour. And the only issue with this one is the ergonomics. Okay, so when you take a look at splash pans versus manure pans, where the manure actually sits in here versus a splash guard where it actually would just fall onto the ground, I actually tend to prefer the ones that would just fall onto the ground, because here's what happened, is this Jake guy comes up to here and tries to milk him, and he's so tall that he actually has to back his head backwards to try to milk this cow, which is not very ergonomically correct, or he has to go sideways to get his head down underneath there to try to milk those cows. So I'm not a big fan of the manure pan. I realize a lot of people put them in, some for some very good reason, but I'm not a big fan of them, and I think it actually detracts, because that extra 6 inches of reach either causes the cow to go forward, or you'd have to do something with your head or with your neck to try to get that cow milked, unless you're a little on the shorter stature side. So here's a low-cost parlor where the cows come in here and we're actually feeding into the parlor. There's no splash guard, no nothing. I would tend to prefer to have at least something there, because I don't like to get one on the forehead or on my hat or whatever. So, but a very simple design in this one. So I always say the takeoffs are definitely a no-brainer on most parlors there. So we saw that one already being milked there, but again, the swing 15 with one person milking about 75 cows per person per hour. Here's an example of a chop gate, a very simple design on chop gate, but this is kind of what I call the 45-second drill. It takes about 45 seconds for these cows to leave. Nobody gets out of the pit, and the other cows come in. And this is only about 2 weeks after this parlor was actually worked with. So as we take a look at that, just I'll leave it on as we watch this, this gate come down. So this is what we call a chop gate, where it actually chops between the two heads, where this cow's milked and that cow hasn't been milked, and we can actually stop the flow of the cows as we go through here. So with this low-cost parlor here, again, we've got rubber matting on this one. This one does have a rapid exit. And it does also have a manure pan as well, in case there's different ways we can actually try to design it. But again, the bottom line is you have to build it to fit the family goals, but I want to make sure it's efficient and that it's very safe and comfortable for the cow and for the milker. So let's turn our attention to robots a little bit. So one of the things when I was in a dairy herd in Spain, after about 13 years, the producer said, this thing's worn out, now what do I do? So where you're at in your dairy career, I think is kind of pertinent to whether you put in a robot or not. And if you've only, say, have 5 or 6, 7 years left in the dairy career, and then you're probably going to be selling out, then I kind of question if the robot's for you. But if you're in that 13 to 17 year time frame of quitting dairying or moving on to something else, then I think you're a pretty good candidate for it. So now we're actually going to go through a little bit of just a partial budget analysis on some robotic milking systems. So we've got a herd size of about 216 cows. This is our milk price. This is our cost per robot. Repair costs, the number of robots needed. So we're going to compare 3 robots to, say, our present system milking in some kind of a milking parlor. A 15-year useful life. The value of the robot, $35,000 when we're done, 5.5% interest. This is our insurance rate, and this is the amount that we're going to try to insure over the 3 robots. Okay, so prior to this, we were at 14 hours a day. After the robots, we feel like we're going to be down to 5.3. The heat detection is also going to go down. This is our labor rate, and realize that that labor rate is going to change over the next 15 to 17 years. And I think the that labor rate is actually pretty important to the whole piece of the puzzle. So the higher the labor, the more impetus you're going to have, I would say, to put a robot in. And the higher the milk price, also because of the milk production increase you tend to get, is going to give you a good impetus to put the robot in versus some other kind of a system. So we do reduce some labor management hours as well. And the labor for your management tends to be higher than the labor for the general day-to-day work on a farm. So the pounds of milk per cow per day, so what you're getting in the past versus what your projected change is going to be here at 7 pounds. This is basically a 10% increase. And so bottom line is that we can almost guarantee a 3 to 5% increase of increased milk production just for the robot. A lot of people will report 10 and 12, sometimes up to even 17 or even more. Okay, but realize a lot of times you're building a brand new facility. And if you build a brand new facility based compared to an older facility, I can almost guarantee you're probably going to get a 6 to 8, sometimes a 10% jump in milk production just by building the facility whether you put the robot in or not. So just kind of be cautious of who we give the credit for the milk production, but they do tend to increase milk production, and sometimes it is quite a bit higher than 3 to 5% if they put it into a stall bar or some kind of a system that they already had and didn't remodel the facility. So somatic cell count will tend to actually go down, which will increase the premiums. And there's also value to the reproduction and herd health value of the software. And that software that comes with the robot, you know, you might see it through the bulk tank down the road. So maybe this is actually double accounting here a little bit, but I like to include it just so people realize that there's a value, or it could be an additional value to that software. Feed intake is probably going to change a little bit, and you might be feeding some more expensive feed ingredients or whatever. So we've looked at herds that are just basically on the same farm, and the robot herd versus a non-robot herd on the same farm, there's only about a half of a cent difference in the cost of that TMR dry matter, but for some farms, it's actually got quite a bit more than that. So replacement heifer cost, cull cow price, okay, so our turnover, our cull rate's gonna actually change, hopefully for the better. Then we look electricity, water costs, and chemical costs are also some things we're going to take a look at there. So the bottom line, and this is on the internet, you can actually pull down, and I'll show that, give you this handout as well, is that you've got your increased incomes in the way of milk production, premiums, increased cull cow sales. It's actually negative because it actually went down. You also have some decreased expenses in the way of labor, management, heat detection. So you've got positive impacts of 174. The negative impacts are going to be, the big one's going to be the increased feed cost, increased repair and insurance cost. And you get a few of those other ones. So 174,000 versus 172,000. So bottom line, the net annual financial impact is about $1,400 to the positive. So we can basically say, comparing your present system, and again, it's important what system you compare this to, but in comparing to this present system versus a robot, you're probably better off with the robot. Okay, and that's not even putting anything on with the quality of life. And so if we put some of the stuff on with the quality of life, it can actually increase. And I think the average person would actually say from our surveys about $15,000 worth of quality of life that they're willing to give up that much just to have the robot, so they don't have to get up at a certain time every morning or be back home in the afternoon and things like that. So here's, so that's the profitability of it. So on a profit scale, we can say that this is actually a positive thing, but profit and cash flow, as you learned from the first class, are not always the same thing, okay? So here we've got the, instead of depreciating this out over 15 years, the bank's gonna make us pay it back in 7 years, okay? So here's the 7 years of the loan, 84 total payments. This is the amount we have to pay back at 5.5% interest. And so our total payment here is $116,397. Now compare that to the capital recovery cost of trying to depreciate this out over 15 years, okay, which was $84,250. Now we've got to pay back, instead of that, $116,000 a year. Okay, so our cash flow just went negative about $32,000 from the current piece of it. So we also saved some labor, okay, and so this is the amount that was hired. So out of $46,000 was how much we saved. 35,000 of that was hired. The other 11,000 came out of our skin. It was our labor, so we weren't paying ourselves to begin with, so it's not a cash flow drain. But here it's actually going to be paying the robot versus the hired labor. So when we take a look at all those things into account, we actually have a total change in robot cash flow of a negative 42,000. Okay, so profitability wise, it was a positive 1,400 something, and now 1,472. And cash flow wise, it's actually a negative 42,000 per year. But realize that's only going to be for the first 7 years until the loan gets paid off. Okay, once that loan is paid off, then what happens? Okay, so now we have labor that's already paid for the next 7 or 8 years if we've got a 15-year depreciation on it. So again, profit and cash flow are two pretty important things, but they're very different. Low-cost milking parlors can pay back in a year or less. So here we've got 1 to 5 years. Robotic milking systems, 5 to 10 years. You've got different types of efficiencies on both the robot and the low-cost milking parlor. So here's a poll. If the robot is profitable, then it'll cash flow. Okay, is that true? Okay, so hopefully from that slide you realize that a robot, even if it's profitable, it might not cash flow, okay, because you got to pay it back in 7 years, or it might be 10 years compared to trying to depreciate it out over 15 years of the useful life of what we have. So we've got a few investment analysis, and I'm not going to take the time to go through here. I did want to mention that we also had in the previous class, I talked to them about the budgets. Okay, so here are some dairy systems across different types of budgets of low input pasture, average input pasture. On the side here, we've got high productive cows at 26,000 pounds of milk in a conventional system, different types of milk prices and things like that. So realize that that's available on our website if anybody's looking to get into dairying or start working with some budgets on dairy milk or milking cows. We also have quite a few organic dairy system budgets here as well. So we have some grass milk type ones without any grain. We also have some ones that are grain. And we also have some high production type systems that are on organic dairy systems as well. And so those are available as well. So using that same depreciation, interest, repairs, taxes, and insurance, what's the cost to rent or lease a dairy cow? Okay, so it really depends on whether you're the owner or the operator. And so here in the middle, you can see we've got our depreciation or interest. Instead of having repairs on the cows, which would be your bed expense, we have this depth loss, and we also have the insurance. So the cost to the operator, you know, per hundredweight equivalent per cow. So a lot of times these cows will be rented to somebody else for anywhere from $1 to $1.30 per day per head. But we also have the operator costs, where if you're the operator, you can kind of figure it out from a different perspective, what you can actually afford to pay to work with that. So hopefully if you pay $1.18 in this here, you're actually still returning another $1 or $2 to make it worth your time to actually rent that cow. So that's something you can take a look at, again, using that same Dirty 5 fixed cost tool. What's the cost to rent or lease a facility? So basically here, we're going to use the exact same thing. We're going to take a look at all the incomes that we have on this dairy farm in way of different types of stalls or heifer housing or whatever. And we take the income, and this could be on land rental as well. So we take the income, and then we divide that by all the, or take this annual income and kind of divide it by the interest rate. And so by the time we take a look at the interest rate, the net income divided by the interest rate, it kind of gives us a value that we can afford to pay for this facility for the annual basis, or pay for an acre of land. Okay, so if two parties want to go together, this is kind of a share milking type one, is that we take a look at the costs of the owner, and those costs of the owner are going to be the exact same thing. So up in here, we're going to take a look at, this is the owner's percentage of all this. So this is the value of the land, the buildings, the livestock, machinery. And so the owner tends to own a lot of that. Sometimes the share milker will come in with a percentage ownership here, or maybe even a percentage ownership of some of the machinery. And so we take a look at who's bringing what to the party, and then we figure out how we're going to split the variable cost to that, and take a look at the total contribution. So on the bottom line over on this side, we can actually say that the owner is still paying about 77% of the total cost of this. And so when that milk check comes, he should probably get 77% of the milk check. Okay, so here's one where they're just basically paying the labor, and the person providing the labor should get about 22% of the milk check. So these can go down to 60-40, 50-50, 40-60, and even 30-70, and go the opposite way as well. And so it really depends on who's bringing what to it, but there's different spreadsheets available here in case you decide to farm with somebody and you want to work with it that way. So that's kind of the thought process. And so in sum, we're going to basically take a look at what's the value of your labor as a young person. I just say, please do not waste it, because it's going to be some of the biggest money you ever made. And those that invest early in life tend to be the biggest winners. The rabbit tends to, or the turtle tends to win before the rabbit. When you take a look at the Dirty 5 tool, that there's a lot of different things we can analyze. Is this a good deal or a better deal than this, whether it be a car or a truck, a robot or a parlor? This parlor versus that parlor, this piece of machinery versus that piece of machinery. Okay, and we can also use that Dirty 5 tool to look at what we should be paying for land rental, or to rent facilities, the dairy cow lease, as we showed that example as well. But again, that share milking spreadsheet, we use the exact same tool thing. So the bottom line is, you just want to try to create a few tools for you to use that hopefully you can use the rest of your life, and it doesn't just have to apply to a dairy farm. It's whether you buy a car or this, that, or the other thing is what's the most efficient. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at Tranel, T-R-A-N-E-L, at iastate.edu. And otherwise, we'll get you the handouts, and we'll kind of go on from there, and appreciate the ability to share with you in your class today. Take care.